You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn Company. I'm your host, Tim Dooner. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome back. It's the show where we hear from you, the listeners, as we open our first listener mailbag of 2019. We'll be answering questions about how Incoterms can be used to a shipper's benefit, the advantages of clean transportation data, and we'll walk you through the components of an LTL freight quote so that you can know exactly what you're paying for. But first, let's take a look at the news, as there were some very curious headlines this week. Uber Freight sourcing truckers to rate shippers. With detention times estimated to exceed 1.1 billion annually, Uber will now allow drivers to rate shipping facilities just as passengers rate Uber drivers. The freight matching app has already received comments from 30,000 active users on 10,000 shipping facilities, according to trucks.com. Many traditional carriers have already been using ELD data to monitor driver dwell times. This has led directly to higher rates and/or removed capacity from the worst offenders and companies who refuse to establish themselves as shippers of choice. Shippers of choice, we covered this way back in June of last year, right in the midst of the capacity crisis on episode 6. I'm working on our Shipper of Choice 2019 guide now. Keep an eye out. But what this really says to us is that carriers are starting to take control. They're starting to capture this data, and they don't want their time wasted any longer. So shippers, beware. They're watching you now. Rail volumes down in first month of new year. 2018 was a boom year for intermodal rail shipments, as combined traffic were up 3.5% year over year. But as demand for coal declines, so do carloads. The downtick began last November after a 9-month surge in the industry, which was partially propelled by the trucking capacity crisis. Since trucking capacity has been less of an issue, insiders aren't as optimistic about intermodal growth in 2019. AAR Senior Vice President of Policy and Economics, John T. Gray, said this in a statement to Supply Chain Dive. What happens in 2019 will depend on how the domestic and global economies hold up the policies, particularly monetary and trade, that come out of our legislative and executive branches. Economists at SMC Jumpstart 2019 expect economic growth to slow. A strong year of growth in 2018 has given way to concerns in 2019 regarding trade wars, stock market volatility, and the government shutdown. I'm not saying shut it down, hunker down for the future. 2019 is going to perform above benchmark, said Donald Radejezic. And I probably just destroyed that, and I apologize to Donald, but Donald Radejezic is the best I can do, as reported to the JOC. By 2020, that second half, that could be questionable, especially if tariffs are still rising, he went on to say. Trade was a big concern among attendees, as a poll showed that 75% held trade war tariffs as their main worry. We're not fine, we're not good, said Walter Kamisis, economist at JLL. Even if a U.S.-China agreement leads to more U.S. exports, the U.S. lacks transportation infrastructure needed to support a more export-oriented economy. I'm sure some of my listeners were at SMC Jumpstart 2019. If you have a recap of that, send it over my way. Email me at tdooner@abornco.com. Love to hear about it. Amazon and Embark spotted testing autonomous trucks on I-10. An observant Redditor first noticed the driverless Peterbilt semis last week. However, when approached for comment by CNBC, both firms declined to comment. Embark CEO Alex Rodriguez said, Embark moves freight for a number of major companies on the I-10. However, we cannot discuss any company specifically, as our relationships are confidential. But there is that picture. And lastly, FreightWaves is running a Trucking Freight Futures Roadshow. I thought this was super interesting. What are Trucking Freight Futures, though? Well, here's what their site has to say about it. Trucking Freight Futures will help bring transparency to the $726 billion North American trucking industry and help participants mitigate price risks. DAT has created a North American trucking market spot lane price assessment methodology specifically for the settlement of trucking freight futures contracts. Monthly futures contracts will be listed on Nodal Exchange and cleared through Nodal Clear. These contracts will be financially settled against the average of DAT's daily price assessments for the relevant lane. I am not entirely sure what all of that means. I really need to know more about it. So next week, if we're lucky, I believe Craig Fuller, CEO of FreightWaves, will be our guest on this show to shed some insight on what freight futures are and what this roadshow is all about that's going through the month of February. If you want to learn more, head over to freightwaves.com or just Google FreightWaves, Freight Futures, and it'll probably pop up. It's going to be the first link. It's exciting stuff. I'm really curious to learn about it. They're live streaming this thing. It seems like a really cool event, and I love what FreightWaves is doing in this industry anyway.
Je viens de défoncer 2 policiers solides.
And somewhere a transportation manager wonders, where's my freight? To see what that clip is from, and to see our weekly Where's My Freight, head over to abornco.com/blog and look for our weekly all the supply chain news you need to know report there. Or on the site, you can just sign up for our newsletter. I send that out every week, that news report. You can do that at our site, which is abornco.com, or simply email me at tdooner@abornco.com, and I will get you listed. And that wraps the news. By the way, before we open the mailbag, if you ever wanted to see the physical manifestation of what the trucking capacity crisis looks like, well, all you had to do was go to the Patriots Victory Parade here in Boston last week. A random spell of 65-degree weather in the dead of winter caused half of New England to converge on the city, and the MBTA didn't do the best job of adding capacity for this human cargo. 1.5 million Patriots fans. And I realize that sounds like hell on earth if you're not a Patriots fan or you're agoraphobic or don't like crowds. But to make things even worse, fan or not, the MBTA only added 26,000 extra seats to their capacity. And boy, getting those 1 million plus extra people out of the city was its own logistical nightmare. But congratulations to the Patriots. But let's just plan this a little better next time, because, at this point, there probably will be, and if it's not them, it'll be the Red Sox or the Celtics or the Bruins. Let's just get people in and out as safely and as conveniently as possible. On to you, the listeners. And if you check the show notes, there will be links to articles where all of these answers have been transcribed. So set down the pen and paper, kick back and relax, as I already took the notes for you. The articles will also be up at abornco.com/blog. Our lead question comes in from Cassidy out of Queens, New York. Cassidy writes, I found your show on how Incoterms work very helpful, but how do I use them to take better control of my freight? Keep up the great work. Well, the show that Cassidy is referencing is episode 24. You can go and listen to that on consultinglogistics.io or on the same app that you're listening to this episode from. It's actually a very popular show, so I was expecting some follow-up questions for this one, so you did not catch me off guard, Cassidy. And here it is. When it comes to international freight, few letters leave shippers more glassy-eyed than the 11 three-letter abbreviations that make up Incoterms. Put simply, Incoterms define who is responsible for transporting, insuring, and paying duties on an individual shipment. Used correctly and to your advantage, they can increase revenue, limit risk, and empower your supply chain. One could argue that they're the 3 most important letters on any commercial invoice. And Cassidy, here is 4 great ways that Incoterms can empower your supply chain. The first one, Incoterms are situational. Incoterms are not one size fits all. Smart shippers will utilize the right terms to mitigate risk, increase cash flow, and leverage volume. In order to use Incoterms to your advantage, you first have to understand what each individual term covers. For example, a shipper with significant volume from a dedicated port may be leaving substantial savings on the table by buying on terms with prepaid freight. Those are the C and D terms. Allowing their supplier to select carriers limits a shipper's ability to control cost. Were a shipper to use a term that grants them control at the port, such as FOB, they can now negotiate through their own carrier network. A shipper would then have the ability to build their own consolidations, choose their own service level, and use that freight volume to obtain lower rates now and in the future. But on the other hand, shippers that make sporadic purchases from a particular supplier or region may not have the resources to arrange transportation. A shipper that is purchasing their first container from Mumbai may be best suited using a more inclusive term such as CIF. That same shipper could always change terms in the future, depending on what best suits their needs. 2. Challenge the terms. Many forwarders, suppliers, and even internal staff may have a preferred Incoterm. This usually occurs with forwarders who are only familiar with a couple of common Incoterms, suppliers looking to maximize their profits, and general unfamiliarity with the terms by your own logistics department or theirs. Due to this, it isn't uncommon to find yourself in a situation where the term being suggested to you may be less than ideal. Push back against that type of thinking, though, as the one person who should know their supply chain best is you. And if you don't, get a great partner. Who does? They'll make you look a lot smarter when the tough questions come in from up top. Number 3, specify the delivery point. Once you've selected the Incoterm that best suits your needs, you still need to define the named place. If your supplier is near Qingdao, but you need the goods shipped FOB from Shanghai, it is imperative that this is outlined in the sales contract. Failing to do so can increase cost and delay the arrival of your goods. The named place should follow the 3-letter Incoterm abbreviation. In large cities and areas with multiple ports, it is crucial that you be specific. Number 4, and here's one that confuses people sometimes, but it's this. Incoterms cover risk, not title or contract. Risk and title of goods are 2 separate matters and should not be confused for one another when using Incoterms. In addition, Incoterms don't replace a contract. A buyer still needs to confirm what the goods are, their price, consequences for breach of contract, custom laws, etc. Also, while some Incoterms do include insurance, it is typically at the minimum coverage allowed by law, so be careful when picking one of those I terms, like a CIF. I know I mentioned that one above, but really look into the policy they have. You may want to look into your own umbrella policy from a great insurance broker, like, I don't know, a Roanoke or an Avalon. But Cassidy, I hope that answer, along with our previous show and article on how Incoterms worked, have helped you part the seas with the power of knowledge. Thanks for writing in, and if anyone else wants to learn more about Incoterms, go back to our last listener mail episode. I think it's been very helpful to people. Roger from Houston writes, my accounting department wants me to start auditing our freight bills before they approve any future charges. Most of our shipments are less than truckload, but I'm having a hard time deciphering what some of these charges mean. What should I be looking at and looking for? Thanks in advance. First off, this is a great best practice. There should be communication between accounting and transportation on what you're being charged on an invoice. All too often, transportation books the freight, but once it's in or out of the dock, that's the last they hear about it and the last they see. But the problem is that accounting may not know exactly what was booked, if charges are accurate, if the service commitments were met or the service level, so oversight here is crucial. That oversight can be performed internally, by you as you're doing now, or if possible, by a freight agnostic outside party that would handle any audits and resolve any discrepancies, a company familiar with doing freight bill audits. All that said, here's my answer, and again, you can find a link to this answer written out in article form right in the show notes of this episode and at abornco.com/blog. So listeners, when's the last time, like Roger, you received a freight quote and wondered, Where the heck did that number come from? Less than truckload, LTL shipping, can save companies a fortune in freight spend. But first, we need to understand what components determine the cost. If you're used to full truckload shipments, you're likely thinking in prices based on per mile or per 100-pound basis, plus a fuel surcharge, the FSC. LTL rates are a bit more involved than that and require us to fill in a few more blanks. Since shippers often have a diverse and wide range of needs that directly influence all of these factors, it's important to review them all in order to arrive at the most cost-effective solution for each move. There's 7 key components that make up the cost of an LTL shipment. Let's start at the first one. Number 1, it's a big one. It's your classification of freight. What is being moved? Just as U.S. Customs has a classification for all goods entering the country, every piece of LTL freight has its own as well. The National Motor Freight Classification, or NMFC, tariff breaks it down into 18 different classes, ranging from 50 to 500. A higher class means a higher rate for every 100 pounds moved. The 4 characteristics you need to know in order to classify your freight are density and value. So density and value, which is basically the cost plus the cubic feet, the length times the width times the height, divided by 1728. You need to know the stowability. How can they store this within the truck? Handling, is there special handling involved? And liability, is it breakable? Does it require insurance? Those kind of things. And the buck stops here. If a product is moved under the wrong classification, it can cost you money in one of 2 ways. The first is you're overpaying on a higher classification. And 2, you're violating transportation law, which can result in hefty fines. So either way, misclassification is going to get you, whether it's at the front or the back. And I'll tell you, it's worthwhile to audit your LTL freight, because when we do that here internally, you'd be surprised how often we find out that customers are paying too much at a higher classification that they don't need to be at. They could drop it down and see some pretty substantial savings. So number 2, we mentioned it in the classification, but yeah, wait, how heavy is it? Typically, the more it weighs, the less you pay, as LTL rates are often structured around weight breaks. Weight breaks are cost tiers set by the price per 100 pounds. As you meet the minimum for each tier and your weight goes up, the cost per pound goes down. Number 3, distance. Where is it headed? This is important for a variety of reasons. First being that the longer the haul, the higher the price per 100 weight will be. The second is that many carriers are regionally based. This means that they only service specific zip codes or geographical regions. So if you're sending a shipment to a zone outside your carrier's service point, then it will be transferred to another trucking company. This is known as interlining. Interlining often increases both risk and cost as you're adding additional hands to the move, as well as having to pay rates based on this secondary carrier. Number 4, minimums. That is the cost to turn the key in the ignition, basically just to hire the truck. Before you even get anything in there, there's a minimum cost. Almost all carriers are going to set a floor to make a move worth their while. This is the absolute minimum charge, the AMC, that you'll pay. The charge is, as it sounds, anything at or below a certain threshold will cost X amount. And this is something to be mindful of during annual contract negotiations. I know those are coming up, because this is often a number that carriers will try to add as minimum weight shipments drive up their cost. Number 5, base rates, your basic off-the-rack rates. When spot quoting or trying to get a ballpark figure, carriers will offer up their own base rates. These rates are quoted per 100 pounds, CWT. Base rates may go up and down depending on the space each carrier has available and can vary widely between lanes. 6, freight all kinds, FAK, one size fits all. FAK freight can be negotiated between the client and the carrier to allow multiple classifications of freight to move under the same tariff or rate. Let's say you ship goods that range from class 50 to 150. You may want to negotiate an FAK classification of 100 for all shipments within the range. This could lead to significant savings for overpayment if arranged properly. And again, you want to be mindful of this and you want to negotiate that with your carrier, because lying to them about classifications you can get caught on and you can be fined on. So again, be upfront with that kind of stuff. You don't want to get into any trouble. Number 7, accessorials. That's everything else. Accessorials cover a wide array of charges, from the typical to the esoteric. What you'll almost always see is a fuel surcharge, that's the FSC. Beyond that, some common charges are residential pickup or delivery, liftgate, special equipment, etc., etc., etc. Accessorials, though, they should not be ignored when negotiating rates, as they can be reduced, flat rated, or altogether eliminated. In addition, if a carrier isn't informed that they'll need any special equipment, this can lead to delays, delivery failure, lost time, and added fees. It's a big headache. If you need a liftgate or something like that, be sure to be specific about the needs of your dock. And surprisingly, a lot of shippers aren't, and it does cause issues. It causes freight to be rejected. It causes freight to come back. Big hassle. Costs everybody time and money. It's an easy correction. It's just giving a little bit more information. Be communicative. Companies looking to protect themselves from market volatility and reduce freight spend can benefit greatly from reviewing their current LTL offerings. An outside service that isn't invested in your freight, again, they're freight agnostic, should maybe even audit your freight classes, and you can work with them to help negotiate discounted rates along all of your lanes from their deep pool of carriers. Something worth looking into, especially if you haven't explored the trucking market. Again, you'd be surprised at the savings we uncover there. And anyway, I hope that helps, Roger. But if you're still at a loss, or if any listeners are in the same situation, feel free, email me, tdooner@abornco.com, and I'll be happy to help you out. That is tdooner@abornandco.com. Our last question comes in from Pablo out of beautiful Virginia Beach, Virginia. Pablo writes, "Your show has been a great resource for my team." Why, thank you, Pablo. "We are looking into options for improving our process and optimizing our shipments. You talk about the power of clean data, but could you outline some ways that clean data can be used in our everyday process?" Well, sure thing, Pablo. Data, now you're spinning right in my wheelhouse. But, this one's going to be easy for me because our 6-time social media champion, account manager, and former SCU 30 guest, Caleb Johnson, already did a great job on an article that laid out some practical uses of clean data. I'd like to thank him for compiling this answer on my behalf and yours. So Pablo, you're asking this because the jury is no longer out. The age of data is here. Data beat Ken Jennings in the form of Watson, and it knew exactly what I would buy online a month before I did, as creepy as that may be. But how can it improve your supply chain today? Why should you take the first steps in cleaning up that dusty old spreadsheet deep in the catacombs of your company's shared drive? Well, the answer is simple, and the benefits abound. That's because we can no longer think of data as an afterthought or receipt, or something held in the catacombs of our hard drive. It's the single most accurate indicator of the future health of your supply chain. So with that, here are 5.5 advantages of cleaning your transportation data, Pablo. Number 1, visibility. Between accruals, accessorials, invoices, and claims, it can be hard to keep tabs on where your budget has gone before being rescued by an audit at the end of the term. Too often, the same goes for your product itself. Not only can clean data keep you out of the dark in the present, it can shed light on where your freight is headed in the future and where it's been in the past. The impact that data brings, not just to the location of your freight, but the status of your payments, allows you to further leverage its impact cross-departmentally. And even for those who already have clean data and know where their money and inventory stands, you may be able to further visibility with recent advances like geo-tracking, IoT, which is the Internet of Things, and chain of custody protocols, like blockchain. Another big benefit, optimization. Talk about it all the time. For many companies, there are opportunities for major savings by optimizing how orders find their customers. Clean data can help determine when loads should and shouldn't be consolidated, driving simple savings by way of dictating mode. Data can also help in more subtle ways with intelligent routing by considering the feasibility of multi-stop loads, pooling, and other overlooked ways to drive savings. Unless you have a clear log of shipment locations, weights, and volumes, these optimizations cannot be realized. Negotiation. Clean data can also generate savings before your product is even ordered through negotiations. Good data gives carriers a clean picture of how your freight moves. A Monet. If a carrier determines your freight fits nicely into their network, they will likely propose more competitive rates than they would have without such evidence. The opposite holds true for carriers who aren't a good fit, which can save you costs and pains of poor service down the line. You don't want bad partners, and bad partners, well, they probably want you, but again, you don't want them. In addition, as your supply chain evolves, you may be able to better predict which service partners provide the most value for your needs. Communication, important in every aspect of business, and it's what breaks down silos. It's the sound of music to well-run organizations. It's communication, but turning your business into a well-oiled machine means synchronization across all divisions, which means supply chain knowledge should no longer be held in isolation, in your warehouse. Precise and readable data is key in relaying information across systems. With usable data, the sales team can keep customers better informed on where products are and where they're going. That makes for happier customers and a happier bottom line. And ultimately, your carrier partners and every part of your supply chain, everyone's goal should be to make your customer happier and their customer experience enhanced. Otherwise, why are we doing this? Internally, though, if your CFO, right? If your CFO asks your transportation manager what their annual freight spend is and how that breaks down into lanes, line items, and SKU numbers, that transportation manager cannot answer that question accurately without clean data. You can't improve your process if you don't have a true representation of what your current process actually is. Future-proof. The supply chain is going digital. It's a fact. We're seeing all the investments pour in there. The data you capture today and the way you capture it is directly connected to your capacity to keep up with the changes many expect to see across the sector. From AI to the Internet of Things and blockchain to automation, a host of advances in tech are primed to make their mark in logistics, and they'll all have one thing in common. They need good data to run effectively. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and you can't turn bad data into desirable outcomes. And this is the point 5. This is the point 5. It's a bit of a plug, all right, shameless plug, but we know the first step to checking your data can be the toughest one, which is why we will do it for you. Yes, that's right. Aborn Company will do it for you for free. If you think your data could use a once-over, we can give it a look and point you in the right direction. If you think your data is spotless, we give it a look and give you an A+. We give you an A+, stick the report card on your CFO's fridge, everybody's happy. It's free either way. Start the scrub, head over to day1.io. That's day01.io. We know this is a big problem in the industry. That is why we have started this service, to help shippers get their data in order so they're not getting ahead of themselves and trying to implement solutions that they're not even ready for because they don't have their data in the right place. But that said, thank you for your question. And Pablo, I appreciate you listening and writing in. I hope that was of service to you. If you need more help, again, email me as I mentioned before, or go to our website or go to Day One. We'd be super happy to help you and to work with you. And thanks for the article, Caleb. Great answer there. One last thing before I go. This was a joy for me. It was Take Your Child to Work Day at Aborn Co. So I brought in one of my sons, my 4-year-old. He's my oldest. And to show him my job, I made a video with him. I let him help me edit it. And now it's up on my LinkedIn. It's on Aborn Co's LinkedIn, as well as Aborn Co's Instagram and YouTube pages. Let's roll a brief clip. It's Take Your Child to Work Day at Aborn Company, where there's no running in the hallways. We respect everyone's opinion during meetings. We don't steal each other's food from the refrigerator. And we'll even let you ring the bell. Join us. What did you bring with you today? Did you bring your computer? Now hiring. excellent positions are available right now to work with an industry leader crafting cutting-edge, modern managed freight solutions. Look, guys, nobody can move the world alone. It takes creativity, curiosity, and collaboration between great people. Join Aborn and Company's Boston area team and be a part of their vision to rethink how shippers and carriers look at their global supply chain. They offer 30 years of traditional industry experience in a free-thinking, tech-friendly, startup environment that doesn't just encourage their clients' growth, but also the growth of their most important asset, their team. Choose to be extraordinary. Choose to be the architect of your career. Just visit abornandco.com, click on the Careers tab, and choose your own adventure today. We can't wait to work with you. Looking to modernize, digitize, and future-proof your supply chain? Visit day1.io for a free Day 1 Data Optimization Report. That's day, the number 0, the number 1.io. Isn't it time you got optimized? Announcing, on October 10th, 2019, Aborn Co. presents TransTech 2020, a supply chain vision and innovation conference. This event is the first of its kind in Boston. Join our panel of speakers from the worlds of logistics and technology as we discuss the modern needs of the supply chain and the merger between the physical and digital footprint that freight creates. Head on over to transtech2020.com for more details. We'll be talking about AI, automation, autonomous vehicles, blockchain, data purity and capture, future-proofing the supply chain, market conditions, transportation management systems, and so much more. Head on over to transtech2020.com for registrant and sponsor details. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to email me at tdooner@abornandco.com. That's TDOONER@abornandco.com. I'd be happy to learn something new with you. For this episode and all of our previous shows, visit consultinglogistics.io or simply search for Consulting Logistics on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player of choice. And hey, if you like the show, the best way you can give back is to share it. And if you really liked it, go on iTunes over there and rate and review. Be much appreciated. That's it. We're out of time. For Caleb, Cassidy, Roger, and Pablo, I'm Tim Dooner, saying take care and happy shipping. Oh, hey, there's Caleb now. Caleb, come in here. Come in here a second. Hey, your article, we used it. It helped out a guy named Pablo.
Which one?
The 5.5 reasons for a clean day.
No, that was fun. I love break managers.
Thanks, Ren. We helped out a guy named Pablo.
Cool. I felt helpful.
Great, man. Go have some lunch.
I will.